What's the most terrifying paranormal experience you've ever had? Story 1. Back around 1991, my then girlfriend and her family moved out of state. They had packed up their entire house and put it on the market. It was during the recession, and her dad had received a job offer he simply couldn't refuse. They lived on the other side of town from me, in one of the older but nicer neighborhoods. The houses there were large, ranch-style homes on generous lots. Theirs was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with a detached garage and a long driveway, big enough for both their boat and RV. The homes weren't crowded together either. Each property had plenty of space and privacy. I still remember that house clearly. There was a massive tree out front that shaded most of the driveway and stretched its branches toward the garage. The backyard had 2 or 3 smaller trees, one of which I'm fairly sure was a fruit tree, maybe an orange tree. When they were packing up, I was helping them box up the last of their things when her dad pulled me aside onto the porch, her mom standing beside him. He asked if he could trust me with something. I already knew her parents liked me and trusted me, but the serious tone in his voice caught me off guard. Still, I told him I'd do whatever they needed. He explained that until the realtor sold the house, he wanted someone to stop by every few days to check on things. Then he handed me a key. "If you could help keep it clean too, that'd be great," he said, pulling out some cash to offer me. I immediately shook my head. "Don't worry about it," I told him. "I'll make sure the place is fine." I knew things were tight for them, and it felt like the least I could do. Still, he seemed uneasy about leaving the house empty. He asked if I could stay a night or two every week so it wouldn't look abandoned. He explained that the only neighbor he really trusted, an older guy across the street, was away on vacation, and he didn't want the house to draw attention. At the time, there were a lot of stories going around about people breaking into foreclosed homes, stealing appliances, or squatting. I told him not to worry. I'd stay over a few nights a week and keep an eye on everything until the place sold. He told me to call if I needed anything, though it would take them a few days to reach their new home. Her dad had a cell phone, rare back then, but it wasn't like today's. He also gave me my girlfriend's grandmother's number, saying she'd know how to reach them if anything came up. For the first few days, I followed through on what they'd asked. I cleaned the kitchen and bathrooms, vacuumed the floors, and then went a step further, washing windows, wiping down walls, dusting everything. The first night I stayed over, I planned to spend the whole night. I told my parents I was working late. It was a Friday, and figured I'd head home in the morning. The house was mostly empty except for a cot, a radio, and a few lamps. I decided to sleep in my girlfriend's old room. Part of me just missed her, and I didn't know when I'd see her again. I drifted off with the radio playing softly, a bit of light coming from the kitchen and the front bathroom. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up freezing. It was fall, so the nights could get chilly, but this was different. It wasn't just cold, it was unnatural, like the air itself was coming from inside a refrigerator. I got up, turned on the heater, and went back to the cot, bundling myself tightly in my sleeping bag. By morning, the house had finally warmed a little, but the strange chill still lingered in my mind. The next evening, I mentioned it to a friend, how unnaturally cold it had gotten inside the house. He looked at me oddly and said it hadn't been cold at all that night. That stuck with me. Over the next few days, I kept up my routine, stopping by the house during the day, checking that everything was fine, tidying up, and finishing my homework before heading home. The next time I spent the night was a Thursday. I remember because I had school the following morning and had worked out how I'd get there from their place, which was a bit farther than my usual route. I arrived just before dark, carrying a small black and white camping TV with bunny ears, just something for company. But when I tried setting it up in my girlfriend's old room, I couldn't get a signal at all. After a few frustrating minutes, I decided to move to the den. The den was clearly an addition, probably converted from a patio at some point. You could tell it wasn't part of the original structure. The floor felt slightly uneven, and the walls didn't quite match the rest of the house. It had that faint, closed-in smell that older rooms get when they've sat unused for a while. I set up my cot in the den, poured myself some hot chocolate from my thermos, and turned on the little black and white TV. The soft hum of static and faint voices made the empty house feel a little less lonely. I was just starting to drift off when I heard a noise from the other side of the house. It sounded exactly like when a broom handle slips from where it's leaned against a wall. First the scrape, then the thud as it hits the floor. I sat up, listening, then got up to check. The broom and mop were still standing upright in the kitchen pantry, exactly where they'd been earlier. On my way back, I stopped by the bathroom. As I stood there, I heard it, someone whispering. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, but it was definitely a voice, a human voice. I suddenly remembered what her dad had said about people breaking into houses and stealing appliances, and my heart started racing. I ran through the house, flipping on every light I could. Most of the rooms didn't have ceiling lights, so I turned on every lamp instead. Then I went to the back porch, switched on the exterior lights, and checked every door and window. All locked, nothing out of place. When I finally went back to the den, my little TV was off. I know for a fact I'd left it on. The air in the room felt heavy. Still, that's when the unease really set in. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. The next day at school, I told a couple of friends about what had happened. They immediately wanted to come over, but I told them her dad had specifically asked me not to have anyone over or throw any kind of party. Not that I would have anyway. I felt torn between asking a friend to join me or keeping my word to her dad. In the end, I decided to keep my word. Over the next few days, I only stopped by the house briefly to check in, never staying long. That Sunday, my girlfriend called me at home. She asked how I was doing and started talking about their road trip to the new house. I must have sounded off because after a while she asked, "Okay, what's wrong?" Other than saying I missed her, I didn't really want to admit that I'd been uneasy staying there alone. I told her to let her dad know I had stayed over a few times and checked on the place almost every day. I even reminded her to cancel their newspaper because it was still being delivered. Then she asked, "Any issues being alone there?" I said, "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "Nothing's bothering you?" I told her about the really cold spell in her room, the noises, and how I could swear I'd heard whispering. There was a pause, and then she said quietly, "Yeah, I kind of figured you would find out." I said, "Kathy, what are you talking about?" She hesitated for a second, then said, "Well, remember how I told you I never liked being home alone?" "Yeah," I said. Sometimes she'd call me over when her parents weren't home, just so she wouldn't have to be by herself. "Is your house haunted or something?" I asked. She sighed. "I'm not sure if it's haunted. There's just something there. But yeah, we'd hear noises and see things sometimes." She went on to tell me how, when she was a kid and they had first moved in, she'd get so scared at night that she'd run into her parents' room and sleep at the edge of their bed. I laughed nervously. "Oh, great. Thanks for telling me now." She said softly, "I didn't want you to think I was weird." Then she added, "Oh, by the way, my dad said you don't have to stay the night there anymore. The neighbor across the street is back from vacation, so he'll keep an eye on the place at night, but he asked if you could still stop by every other day to check in." "Yeah, sure," I said. For the next few days, I kept it up, making sure to only go by during daylight hours. But as the weeks went on, the days got shorter. One evening, I didn't make it there until after 7. It was already dark outside. I unlocked the front door, flicked on a few lights, and went to use the bathroom. As I was taking a piss, facing the toilet, I could see the reflection of the hallway in the big wall-to-wall mirror. Something just a quick blur moved past the doorway, fast. I froze, then shouted, "Hello?" I left the house in a hurry that night, didn't even bother turning off the lights. The bathroom light, the hall light, both still on when I slammed the door behind me. A day later, Kathy's dad called me. "Hey," he said, "did you leave a light on at the house? The neighbor said he saw the lights on last night and saw you inside." My stomach dropped. "Yeah, I stopped by around 7, I told him. Checked on everything and left." He paused for a second. "No, this was at 11. I felt a chill run through me. "It wasn't me," I said. He didn't say much after that, just a quiet, "All right, thanks." I went back a few more times after that, but always during the day. Then the realtor took over, and the house was sold off to some company that bought up properties in the area. I can't even explain the relief I felt knowing I'd never have to step foot in that place again. Story 2. I never believed in haunted roads, at least not until Cold Hollow Road showed me otherwise. At the edge of the moor stood an old farmhouse, half swallowed by fog and silence. Locals whispered it was cursed, a place where the mist never lifted, and the air always carried the stench of rain and decay. Dogs refused to approach, and those foolish enough to stay the night swore they heard footsteps on the roof. I should have listened. It began with my sister Lily. She fell ill suddenly. Fever, tremors, eyes darting toward the windows in the dead of night. She woke screaming about the man by the glass. I dismissed it as a fever dream until I saw him too. One foggy night, I caught a glimpse of a tall figure through the window, standing just beyond the gate, motionless, silent, watching, and then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Sleep abandoned me. Drawn by a strange pull, I stepped outside, following the wind's whisper through the trees and down the long dirt path to Cold Hollow Road. The fog thickened, curling around me like smoke. The world felt heavier, slower, muted. A flicker of light appeared ahead, an old chapel hidden in the woods. Its doors hung crooked, the bell long gone. Inside, a man in a black priest's coat stood with his head bowed. His collar was torn, but his expression was calm, almost serene. He didn't speak. He simply turned and began walking beside me. Each step echoed softly against the dirt, a sound like dripping water. Somehow, I followed. After a while, footprints appeared behind us in the mud, one after another, though I hadn't made a single mark. At the clearing, the priest paused and glanced at his watch. 8:55. Then silence fell, unnatural and suffocating. A flash of silver. The world shifted. When I blinked, he was gone. By the time I stumbled back to the farmhouse, the fog was lifting. Lily's fever had broken, but my other sister Maya stood pale on the stairs, clutching a candle. She whispered about sounds beneath the floorboards. Together, we went to the cellar. The boards had been pried open. Beneath them lay a rotting priest's collar, a long black coat, and a silver pocket watch that glowed faintly in the dark. The engraving read, Father Jacob Harlan. The grandfather clock struck 9. When we looked up, he was there, standing at the top of the stairs, silent, fading. He didn't seem angry this time, just weary. And then he vanished, along with the fog. They say Cold Hollow Road is quiet now, but sometimes, when the clock strikes 9 and the mist returns, I still hear those footsteps. Story 3. So, where I live, there's a town. Yes, an entire town listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was established in the late 1800s to early 1900s, and it's like stepping back in time. Among its many preserved buildings stands a church, because of course there is. This church is stunning. Honestly, the whole town is gorgeous. All the original structures still stand, and residents are required to maintain their authenticity, at least on the outside. But I'm getting off track. The church, made entirely of wood, has somehow survived untouched by time. Considering the damage saltwater and coastal weather can do to wood, that's nothing short of miraculous. Yet the exterior remains pristine, and the interior is just as original and well preserved. The first time I saw it, I was in awe. I'll admit, I felt a bit uneasy stepping inside, being a pagan witch and all, but the moment I entered, it took my breath away. And no, the church isn't unconsecrated. They still hold Sunday services there. When I first walked in, I half expected to be bombarded by angry spirits trying to drive me out. That, however, wasn't the case. There were spirits, plenty of them, and while many clearly weren't thrilled about a witch stepping into their church, I couldn't really blame them. The entire town is haunted, but the church, well, I wasn't prepared for just how many souls lingered there. After that first visit, I didn't think I'd ever return, mostly out of respect. I didn't want to upset the church's spirits again. But as fate would have it, my brother-in-law decided to get married there this past Monday. Out of respect, I stayed outside for as long as the rain allowed. Eventually, though, I had to go in for the ceremony. To my surprise, the spirits welcomed me and everyone else with warmth. They sat quietly among us in the pews, peaceful and content. The ceremony was beautiful, and though a few of the lady spirits seemed scandalized by the bridesmaids' dresses, the rest watched on with gentle smiles. I have to preface this next part with a sad story. My husband's aunt recently lost her husband to cancer, and she's been struggling ever since. I can't blame her. I don't know what I'd do if I lost my husband. Even though she was invited to the wedding, none of us really expected her to come. Well, I did. She may not like me, but I knew she'd never miss one of her nephew's weddings, especially the youngest's. She was never able to have children of her own, and I think being there was her way of staying connected to family. Honestly, it was nice to see her, no matter how she feels about me. This day wasn't about either of us. It was about her nephew. And for the record, I have no idea how she feels about my new sister-in-law. What did surprise me was seeing her husband there too, his spirit standing quietly beside her, supporting her just as he always had. What I didn't expect was for her to let me comfort her when she began to cry. I'll admit, I'm not always the easiest person to get along with. I can be abrasive, okay, most of the time, and I generally don't like people, so sue me. After the ceremony, just before we all left the church, I encountered someone I hadn't expected, one of the original pastors. As I've mentioned, the church has no shortage of spirits, but I'd never come across any of its former pastors before. Everyone was filing out. The minister who performed the ceremony had already left, and I happened to glance back toward the pulpit. There, standing beneath the arch, was a man in full pastoral regalia, one of the church's original pastors. He stood exactly where the modern minister had been moments before, glaring at the spot as though the air itself had offended him. Then he looked up at me and smiled. "Thank heavens that awful man is gone," he whispered, suddenly appearing beside me. "I despise men who demand payment to marry two people so clearly in love," he sighed, shaking his head. "Besides, he was rude and insufferable." I stared at him, confused as to why he was approaching me, the witch. He simply smiled and patted my arm. "Not all who walk these pews approve of one such as yourself," he said gently, "but I've watched you since your first visit to my church. You respect the sanctity of this place and its history. I trust you more than I ever trusted half my congregation. Being dead has taught this old man a thing or two." He grinned. "You, my dear, are welcome here any time. Perhaps you can help me convince a few of my lingering parishioners to move on." And with that, he was gone. Just poof, as if nothing significant had happened. I stood there for a long moment, stunned. A ghost had just given me permission to return and asked for my help in guiding his congregation to the other side. I've had plenty of living people ask me to help spirits move on, but never a spirit himself. It's a new experience, even for me. I might go back. I might not. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. Story 4. Today I'm going to share the true experience of a friend of mine who has absolutely no psychic sensitivity from when he was hospitalized with a leg injury. According to him, this happened around 1983, back when Michael Jackson's Thriller was everywhere. The hospital he was admitted to was quite large and he was placed on the 3rd floor. Each floor had its own smoking lounge, but at night and during the late hours, patients were only allowed to use the one next to the lobby on the 1st floor. Today, that would seem unthinkable, but back then, indoor hospital smoking areas weren't unusual. One night, he felt the urge to smoke. He slipped a cigarette into his pocket, and since he was thirsty, grabbed an orange juice as well. Tucking a $1 bill into his pocket, he stepped out of his room and walked down the hall to the elevator lobby. He looked at the floor indicators. One elevator sat idle on the 1st floor, the other on the 6th. When he pressed the button, the 6th floor elevator began its descent. He stepped inside, ready to ride down to the lobby. As expected, the lobby was quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the vending machines. On his way to the smoking lounge, he bought a 60-tints orange juice from a vending machine, pocketed the change, and lit his cigarette. After finishing, he made his way back to the elevator lobby. One elevator sat on the 1st floor, the other on the 6th. So late at night, and yet one is up there. Strange. He pressed the button. Instead of taking the elevator already waiting on the 1st floor, the 6th floor elevator began its descent. What? That doesn't make sense. There's one right here. Is it out of order? He shrugged it off. After all, the ride was only to the 3rd floor, and the other elevator was already on its way. Before long, the doors of the 6th floor elevator slid open, and he stepped inside. He pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator began to ascend. 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. But it didn't stop. 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor. Ding! The chime echoed through the otherwise silent elevator. The doors slid open on the 6th floor. Beyond them stretched a long, dark hallway. This is creepy. He quickly pressed the close button and hit 3 again, hoping it would move. But no matter how long he waited, the doors refused to budge. He pressed the button repeatedly. Nothing. What's going on here? What the hell is this? Then, a voice echoed, chilling and high-pitched. Panicked, he jabbed the close button again, but the laughter only grew. Ha 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 ha. He sensed movement from down the hallway. From the far end of that endless darkness, a small boy came sprinting toward him, laughing maniacally. Ha 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 ha. Overcome with terror, he pounded the close button, but the doors wouldn't budge. All the while, the boy ran closer. Ha 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 ha. Laughing as he ran. Still, the doors refused to close. The boy drew nearer. Ha 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 ha. He pressed the button harder. The boy kept coming. Ha 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 ha. Again and again until finally, just as the boy reached the doorway, the doors began to close. Relieved, he thought. Finally, but the boy slipped inside at the last moment. The child grabbed his waist. Got you. He blacked out. When he came to, he was lying in his hospital bed. So, it had just been a dream. Relieved, he looked out the window. The sky was still gray, lingering like the night, and his body was drenched in sweat. Ugh, a nightmare like that in a hospital is the worst. But then, deep inside his head, he thought he heard it again. He shuddered. Coins jingled in his pocket. He reached inside, a quarter, a dime, a nickel, 3 coins. He really had bought that orange juice. I definitely went down to the 1st floor, but I don't remember coming back up. And still, from the back of his mind, the laughter wouldn't stop. Terrified, he scanned the room, but of course the boy wasn't there. Then, on a hunch, he pulled back the blanket, and there he was. The boy lay under the covers, staring right at him with that same wide grin. He blacked out again. Shortly afterward, he was transferred to another hospital. Since then, he's never seen anything like it again. Even those who believe they're insensitive to the supernatural should be careful, especially during a hospital stay, and especially late at night. Story 5. I used to live on Indian burial grounds. When I was 10, my family moved into a house outside a small Arizona town, a pale stucco building planted on the edge of endless desert. My parents loved the peace, the wide skies, the quiet, but at night, the silence wasn't calm. It was too heavy, too watchful. The first night, I heard drums, distant but steady, echoing through the dry air. My dad swore it was just coyotes, or maybe neighbors playing music, but our nearest neighbor lived miles away. Then came the dreams. I'd wake drenched in sweat, remembering faceless figures circling a fire, chanting in a language I didn't understand. My sister began speaking in her sleep, mumbling the same words I'd heard in my dreams, her voice rasping as if it wasn't her own. When I shook her awake, she'd just stare at me, eyes wide, empty, unblinking. One evening, I was digging in the yard when my shovel struck something solid. I brushed away the dirt and froze. They weren't animal bones. They were small, delicate like the bones of a child's hand. My parents rushed over, pale and tense. My mom whispered something to my dad that I couldn't hear. Then they told me to cover it back up, to never dig there again, to never speak of it. That night, the drums were louder. Their faces were pale with fear, though they tried to hide it, smiling too wide, speaking too softly. But I could tell. After that day, the whispers began. They came from the walls, low and constant, murmuring words just beyond understanding. At first, I thought it was the wind sneaking through the cracks, but the wind doesn't whisper your name. Then things started to move. Chairs scraped across the tile when no one was near them. Doors creaked open even when we bolted them shut. Shadows stretched longer than they should, reaching toward us like dark fingers. The night we finally fled, my mother screamed from the bathroom. When my father and I ran in, she was standing frozen before the mirror. Her reflection was still moving. Her double smiled, its mouth open too wide, revealing rows of sharp, crowded teeth. That was enough. We packed before dawn, leaving the lights on, the doors open, and our things behind. We never went back. But the house is still there. I drive past it sometimes, out on the edge of that dead stretch of desert. Nobody ever stays long, just a few months at most. Every few years, the police tape reappears, fluttering in the wind. I used to live on Indian burial grounds, and I know something there is still alive, and it remembers me. Story 6. I was assigned to work as a security guard at an abandoned warehouse. From the moment I arrived, I knew I wasn't going to like it. The place was an abandoned warehouse, massive and eerily quiet. It was just me and one other guard. Still, I told myself, it's whatever. How bad could it be? My boss gave me a quick rundown of the building and the areas I'd be patrolling. There were 5 floors, a basement, a rooftop, and an outdoor area. The first floor was the largest, split into 2 sections, and some areas were completely pitch black at night. I only went down to the basement once. It was too creepy to go back. Outside, the area was wide and open. In one corner, there were old rail tracks. Apparently, trains used to run through there, but now the tracks just stop at a dead end. You can still spot bits of them scattered around the city. The second floor, like the first, was divided into 2 parts, but much smaller. One side looked like an abandoned hospital, while the other looked completely different, almost like 2 separate buildings. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors all looked the same. I especially hated the 5th floor. It was pitch black, and I swear I heard voices there. I avoided it whenever I could. One guard was assigned to patrol the 1st floor, the basement, and the outside area, while the other handled the upper floors and the rooftop. On my first night, I was told I'd be covering floors 2 through 5, and the roof. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it like eyes were on me. It wasn't just nerves. It felt as though something unseen was watching my every move. I tried to shake it off, but soon I started to feel like someone was walking right behind me. Every time I turned around, there was no one there. What unsettled me most wasn't the darkness or the silence. It was the overwhelming sadness that hung in the air. Out of nowhere, I started crying during my shift. It felt like I had lost my parents, even though I knew they were alive. The grief was crushing. I cried for hours, drained and hollow, like something had been taken from me. At one point, I called my sister to ask if mom and dad were okay, hoping to shake the feeling, but it didn't help. It was as if something was trying to convince me they were gone. Later, my sister told me that right before I called, she'd started crying too, for no reason at all. I only lasted about 3 or 4 days on that job. During my last shift, things were at their worst. I heard heavy footsteps, loud, clear, and impossible to mistake. It sounded like someone or something was up there with me. I felt watched, like every move I made was being listened to. There was also this strange pull, like it didn't want me to leave, as if it wanted me to stay. That night, a new guard had joined us, and we agreed to switch patrol areas from time to time. I handled floors 2 through 5 and the rooftop, while he covered the 1st floor, basement, and outside. Then we'd switch so neither of us got stuck in one area for too long. When I was patrolling the 3rd floor, I walked down to the end of the hallway. When I looked to my right, I saw a cross carved directly into the wall, etched deep, like it had been there for years. I had never noticed it before. Something about it felt wrong. I got out of there fast. Later, the other guard came up to me and asked, "Hey, by any chance, when I was doing the upstairs patrols, were you up there?" I told him no. Why? He said, "I keep hearing footsteps and talking, but when I look around, there's no one." I brushed it off, told him it was probably noise from outside, and we carried on. I didn't want to scare him, but after that shift, I told him everything, what I'd felt, what I'd seen, and how wrong that place truly was. During our last hour on duty, the other guard and I were hanging out downstairs in our little break room. There was a small side room where I ended up sitting for a bit, trying to relax. That's when I started hearing footsteps again. I shut the door, but the room was so quiet that every sound echoed. I decided to record it, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. While recording, I kept saying the word again, and right after that, more footsteps followed, as if something was responding to me. It felt like whatever was there could actually hear me. Before we left for the night, we were saying our goodbyes when, out of nowhere, the window right next to us started shaking violently. We both froze, then nervously laughed it off because it made no sense. We could see the window clearly, no one was outside, and if someone had thrown something or hit it, we would have noticed. There was simply no explanation for why it happened. I ended up quitting after that. This all happened earlier this year, around late March, but I still think about it. Every time I pass by that building, I get the same uneasy feeling, like it's watching me. I honestly believe that if I'd stayed there any longer, something might have followed me home, or worse, something could have happened to me. I tried researching the building afterward, but found nothing. No records, no stories, nothing to explain what I experienced. Still, I can't shake the feeling that a child and an adult died there. I'd sometimes hear light footsteps, like a kid running around, and heavier ones too, like an adult's. There were times I could hear both at once, like they were playing together. It gave off this strange father and son kind of energy. If that's really what happened, I hope they're both at peace. I guess I'll never truly know. Story 7. I think I saw ghosts in the haunted forest. To break the ice, I'll admit I've been drinking tonight, but I need you to believe me when I tell you what happened in that forest. I have to get this off my chest before it's too late. We never meant to go to a haunted forest. We just wanted a quiet place to smoke. My friends Connor and Claudia were heavy smokers back at university, same as me. We'd smoked together countless times before. We knew our limits, and nothing weird had ever happened to us while high. I want you to understand that Connor was the only one with a car, so he usually picked the spots. He pulled up a map, pointed at one nearby forest, and said, "It's only a 30-minute drive, we can spark one as the sun sets." That sounded perfect. We'd done this routine hundreds of times. Drive out somewhere quiet, smoke, chill, drive home. We left after classes around 6 in the evening. It was early winter, sometime in November. The drive was uneventful, the usual banter filling the car. Claudia vented about her ongoing feud with her ex-friend group. Connor complained about his ex's latest Instagram story. I was joking about a girl I'd matched with on Tinder. Everything felt completely normal. Nothing warned us that night would be any different. We parked in a small gravel lot at the edge of the forest. Ahead of us was a narrow path cutting through the trees, leading to a large metal bridge that disappeared into the woods. None of us had ever been there before, but we followed the path anyway, laughing and chatting like usual. I was itching to smoke by the time we reached the bridge, but the moment I stepped onto it, something felt wrong. It's hard to describe. The bridge was this faded red-gray color, overlooking the town on one side and a dark stretch of water and forest on the other. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then came this strange feeling like a wave of darkness in my head, whispering intrusive thoughts. For a second, I imagined pushing someone off the bridge or jumping myself. I'd never felt anything like it before. It wasn't a warning to stay away. It felt like an invitation, pulling me in. We crossed the bridge and wandered deeper down the path. The sun seemed to vanish in seconds. One moment the trees were gold with light, and the next it was dusk. Connor frowned. "How did we miss the sunset?" he asked. Claudia shivered. "Guys, I'll be honest. This place is kind of eerie. We could get lost. After we smoke, we should head back." Trying to play it cool, I said, "Yeah, we'll head out after. I'll drive us zooted and play my playlist this time." But then the path started splitting in weird directions. Some looped back, others ended in dead brush. Before long, we realized we were lost. It was completely dark now, and we had to use our phone flashlights just to see a few feet ahead. That's when we heard it. Faint screaming, distant at first, then echoing from somewhere around us. Connor's voice cracked when he said, "Do you guys hear that? Or am I going crazy?" Claudia and I spoke at the same time. "I heard that too. I can still hear it. Do you think it's animals?" Connor tried to keep calm. "Probably, like deer, pigs, or farm animals. There's gotta be other people in these woods too, probably just messing around." But even he didn't sound convinced. The strangest thing wasn't the noise, it was the feeling, that deep, gut-level certainty that something was watching us. The forest looked normal, just trees and shadows, but the darkness between them felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was like the air itself was hostile, sinister. I knew the others felt it too, even if no one said it out loud. After wandering in circles for what felt like hours, Connor finally said, "Screw it, we still have the weed. If we can't find our way out sober, maybe we'll find it high." Claudia and I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. I said, "Fine, but let's at least find a decent spot first, somewhere we can see the way back." We eventually found a small clearing. It felt strangely peaceful, like a pocket of safety cut off from the rest of the forest. The stars glimmered faintly through the treetops as we sat down and lit up. For a while, everything felt normal again. Then I noticed a smell. At first it was faint sweet, like overripe fruit, but then it turned sour, sulfuric, metallic, rust and rot. It grew stronger by the minute. I didn't know it then, but that smell came from them. Then Claudia said, "Guys, I've lost my lighter. Help me find it." She started feeling around the ground, her flashlight flickering weakly in the dark. I turned on mine to help, and that's when I saw it. Just a few steps away, maybe 8 or 9 feet, stood a figure, tall at least 6.5 feet, with long white hair and a beard that looked almost silver in the light. His skin was pale, and he wore a cloak, brown and red, tattered, ancient-looking, like something from another century. "Look," I shouted. Claudia froze. Connor turned his light, and the beam caught more figures behind the first one, then more beyond them, dozens. They surrounded us, children, teens, adults, all cloaked, standing still in perfect silence. There must have been 50, maybe 60 of them, encircling us like vultures, but they didn't move, they just watched. The first figure stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until he was only 6 or 7 feet away. When he spoke, his voice was calm, polite, almost gentle, thick Brummy accent. "Don't be afraid." That's when Connor snapped. He bolted into the dark, sprinting through the trees. I followed without thinking. The faint screams we'd heard earlier now roared all around us. Closer, louder, almost human, but not quite. As we ran, our lights caught glimpses of pale faces, cracked masks, and hands reaching toward us, thin and colorless. We tore through the woods, hearts pounding, until we saw the metal bridge ahead. We didn't stop running until we reached it. Then, as the reality sank in, I realized Claudia wasn't with us. Connor's voice was barely a whisper. "We can't go back." We saw the car through the trees, a glimmer of metal in the dark. Relief hit me hard, but it didn't last. Between us and the car, scattered among the trees, were maybe 20 of them, watching, pacing slowly, like shadows shifting in the fog. One of them tall, thin, with that same tattered cloak, raised a hand and waved. I could see the outline of their hand in the flashlight beam, and it was missing fingers. We didn't stop. We jumped into the car, locked the doors, and sped off. Neither of us spoke the entire way back. When we finally called the police, they didn't believe a word. They smelled the weed, ran a test, and decided we were just high and paranoid. But Claudia never came back. 2 years later, she's still missing. Connor and I don't talk anymore. We tried, but neither of us could handle it. I've done everything to move on, but I can't. Sometimes when I'm home at night, I'll look out the window and swear I see them. Those same cloaked figures standing in the trees, just far enough that I can't be sure. I barely leave my room now. I don't smoke anymore. I can't sleep without nightmares. I just want someone to believe me. Story 8. I haven't experienced many spooky things myself, but my family has, and what I'm about to share still gives me chills. It's about djinns, supernatural entities said to live among us, unseen. Between our house and our neighbors, there's a narrow lane people whisper about the path of the jinn. The room beside it has always felt off. Anyone who sleeps there sometimes hears footsteps at night. Not normal footsteps either. They sound heavy, muffled, and impossible because there are solid walls where the sound should be coming from. The scariest incident happened back in 1998, during the Great Flood in Bangladesh. If you remember that time, you'll know how bad it was. Endless rain, floodwater everywhere, and nights without electricity. The whole atmosphere felt thick and eerie with nothing but the sound of rushing water and distant thunder. One night, my uncle was sleeping in that room. Around midnight, he was jolted awake by a deafening crash like something huge had fallen. Right after, he heard the sound of many footsteps running outside as if a crowd was circling the house. But the windows were shut tight against the storm and the road outside was completely underwater. No one could have been out there. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. At that exact moment, a thunderbolt struck the old tree in front of our house, setting it ablaze. Everyone rushed out and saw the tree burning in the middle of the flood. It burned for a long time before the rain finally put it out, leaving behind only a blackened trunk. After that night, we stopped using that room. To this day, it's only used for storage, and sometimes, even now, someone swears they still hear footsteps from the jinn's path when the house falls silent. Story 9. I swear my old home from when I was a kid was haunted. I lived there until I was 9, before we moved, and I had so many strange things happen in that house. It was a terrace house on a council estate, and even thinking back now, it always had this odd, heavy feeling to it. In the evenings, I'd put my clothes in the washing basket, but for some reason, I could never bring myself to walk past my parents' bedroom at night, even when they weren't in there. During the day, it was fine, but at night, something about that hallway felt wrong. I'd toss my clothes in the basket and sprint back to my room. One night, I finally found out why. I walked out of my bedroom to drop off my clothes and saw 2 arms sticking out of my parents' doorway, just arms motionless, hanging there in the dark. I threw my clothes into the basket and bolted back to my room, diving straight into bed. Another time, it was early morning and I went downstairs to get a drink. My parents were still asleep. I checked. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a mirror that reflected part of the kitchen, and in it, I saw someone who looked exactly like my mom, walking around in there. I froze, ran back upstairs, peeked into their bedroom again, and there they both were, still fast asleep. And then there was the last thing, the most persistent of all. I would hear my name being called in what sounded exactly like my mom's voice. I'd go downstairs to see what she wanted, only for her to look completely confused, insisting she hadn't called me. And it wasn't just that. Quite often, I'd feel someone twirling my hair, slowly, like a finger wrapping around the strands. It would happen all day, whenever I stayed home, all day. When we finally moved, it stopped, instantly. From day one in the new house, nothing, not a single incident. So, do I think my old home was haunted? Absolutely. And I think whatever it was had its attention on me. Because years later, when I told my mom about it, she went pale. She said she'd experienced a few odd things there, but nothing like what I did. Story 10. I've never had any paranormal experiences before, nothing even remotely strange. But this happened earlier this year, around March or April. I was finishing up some work late at night in my basement, and by the time I was done, I was too lazy to go upstairs to my room, so I just decided to crash on the extra bed down there. I had a pretty normal dream at first, long, but nothing unusual. Near the end, though, something strange happened. The dream started to zoom in on the faces of the people in it, one by one, almost like the final scene of a play where each character steps forward for their bow. After a few faces, it zoomed in on a man I didn't recognize, maybe in his 20s, white, with long red hair. He was smiling, but his eyes, they were wrong. They were shaped like triangles. Then the dream moved on to the next character, but something in me suddenly froze. Wait, I thought, something about that guy was off. Before I could even process it, the dream cut back to him, the red-haired man. But this time he was staring directly at me, still smiling, but now there was fire in his eyes, like he knew I'd realized he didn't belong there. I woke up suddenly, feeling intense heat on my face, like someone had been standing right over me. At the same moment, I heard footsteps sprinting away from my bed and disappearing into the pitch-black basement hallway. My heart was pounding. I bolted upstairs and didn't stop until I reached my room, where I eventually managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I kept thinking about what happened, but I couldn't dwell on it. I had a deadline to meet and needed to get back to work. That night, I ended up in the basement again, working late. I know it sounds insane, but I was so focused on finishing my project that I completely forgot about the night before. When I finally decided to sleep, I lay down on the same bed. This time, I didn't dream at all. But around 4 or 5 a.m., I jolted awake, and again, I heard footsteps running away from my bed. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started heading toward the stairs. Halfway through the hallway, though, I froze. It wasn't just fear, it was something worse. A sudden crushing dread that hit me like a wall. It wasn't like I was scared of something I could see. It was deeper, heavier. Like my whole body knew something was there even though the lights were on and nothing was in sight. My muscles locked up completely. I wanted to run, but it was like my body refused to move. After about 30 seconds of standing there frozen, the only thing I could think to do was call my girlfriend. My phone was still in my hand. To my relief, she actually answered, even though it was the middle of the night. I told her to stay on the line with me and not to hang up no matter what. Hearing her voice must have grounded me a bit, because that crushing feeling of dread eased slightly. I managed to take a few slow steps toward the stairs, progress at least, compared to being completely paralyzed before. But then, maybe 2 steps in, I felt the back of my shirt lift, just a slow, deliberate tug, like someone was pulling it upward from behind. That was it. Pure fight or flight kicked in. My legs unfroze instantly, and I bolted up the stairs, sprinting all the way to my room without looking back. Nothing significant happened after that night. I definitely learned my lesson and went back to sleeping in my room. Since then, I've been down in the basement plenty of times for work, cleaning, whatever, and nothing strange has ever happened again, but I haven't slept down there since. Like I said, I've never experienced anything like this before, and nothing like it has happened since. It's not the wildest story, but every time I think back on it, I get this uneasy feeling in my chest. That man I saw in my dream, he didn't seem entirely human. There was something wrong about him. And the creepiest part, it felt like he was trying to blend into my dream, like he was there the whole time, hoping I wouldn't notice him. Story 11. I encountered something strange on a walk through the woods near the old cemetery, a place I visit all the time. This happened just a few days ago. I was walking around my block and decided to head toward the cemetery, specifically the abandoned one in the woods, before you reach the main, newer cemetery. To be clear, I wasn't really exploring the cemetery itself, more the woods and clearing around it. Let me explain the layout so it makes sense. Before you reach the cemetery, there's a church. If you keep going straight from there, you'll hit a gravel road. On the left side of that road is my friend's grandma's house, and on the right is a stretch of woods. If you follow that gravel road for about 5 to 10 minutes, then take a left into the woods and walk for another 5 minutes, you'll reach the abandoned cemetery. If instead you take a right along that same path, it leads to a clearing. If you skip both turns and just keep walking straight, you'll eventually end up at the main cemetery. I usually only go there when I'm putting down flowers or cleaning up the children's graves that are set far back among the trees, but this time I was in the abandoned section. So I'd recently bought an EMF reader and a pair of dowsing rods. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. I actually brought them along that day because I'd planned to visit the old train tracks, but at the last minute, I decided to explore the woods around the abandoned cemetery instead. As I was heading up there, the air felt strange, heavy, like the atmosphere had changed. I got this uneasy feeling in my stomach telling me I shouldn't go any farther, but I ignored it. I pushed on into the woods anyway. Not long after, I came across a huge puddle, almost like a small pond, and started walking around it. That's when I noticed something odd, an animal skull, which I later realized was from a vulture. Nearby, I found the rest of its bones laid out in a circle. It struck me as bizarre, but for some reason, I kept exploring. It didn't really hit me how bad of an idea that was, or how wrong the place felt, until much later, when it was already too late to turn back. It was starting to get dark, and I realized I'd gotten lost somewhere in the woods. I kept moving since my phone had no signal, and wandering around aimlessly felt better than standing still. After a while, I stumbled across this strange formation, a perfect circle made of tree stumps. For some reason, I thought it'd be a good idea to sit in the middle and use my EMF reader and dowsing rods to see if I could pick up anything. I actually started getting a lot of readings, strange spikes and movements, but my phone had died by then, so I couldn't record or document any of it. That's when things got really unsettling. I began to hear whispers drifting through the trees, faint at first, then clearer. They were calling my name. The voices sounded familiar, like people I knew, but there was something off about them. They were too perfect, too smooth, like someone was imitating human speech. I didn't follow the voices. Instead, I tried to retrace my steps, but it was like the forest had changed around me. Paths I thought I recognized didn't look the same, and the trees seemed different, almost as if they'd shifted. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I found my way out and ended up near the highway by the forest. I haven't gone back there since. But yeah, that was my experience. Ghost, paranormal, mimic, whatever it was. I honestly still don't know what to make of it. Story 12. I want to share a strange story that was told to me by a woman my friend once brought along. We'll call her Sarah. It was something that happened in the house she lived in as a little girl, her so-called childhood home. Right by the front door of that house was a small room, not quite a living room, not a bedroom either, just an odd little space with no clear purpose. The door to that room was always kept shut, and no one in the family ever used it. It was almost treated like a forbidden room, and though Sarah was curious, there was an unspoken rule that no one talked about it. One day, when her parents were out and she was home alone, she finally gave in to her curiosity. That room had always called to her in a way she couldn't explain. On impulse, she decided to open the door, just to take a look inside. It turned out the room was being used for storage, cluttered with cardboard boxes, old furniture, and random forgotten things. But what caught her eye was a single doll placed neatly on top of an old chest at the back of the room. It was an antique porcelain doll, worn with age and covered in dust. It had faded blonde curls, glassy blue eyes that seemed to catch the light, a pale face with rouged cheeks, and a frilled dress whose colors had long since dulled. Sarah said it felt as though the doll was staring right at her. Not just in the way dolls sometimes do, but really looking at her. She still remembers the feeling vividly, like the doll's gaze was somehow alive. Near the front of the room, within easy reach, was a cardboard box. Curious, she opened it and found an old photo album inside. She sat down and began flipping through the pages. The album was filled with photos of her parents, smiling, younger, posing with a little girl Sarah didn't recognize. But Sarah had no siblings. She was an only child. Maybe a cousin or a friend's kid, she thought, shrugging it off. Without giving it much more thought, she closed the album and placed it back in the box. That very night, while Sarah was asleep, she woke to a strange sensation, like something was bouncing on top of her body. The pressure was heavy, as if a pair of human legs were stepping on her chest and stomach. She tried to open her eyes, but her body wouldn't respond. She was frozen, trapped between wakefulness and paralysis, while that weight pressed down harder and harder. For nearly a week, it kept happening. Every night, she would wake to that same crushing pressure, unable to move, unable to scream. By the end of it, she was completely exhausted and terrified to sleep. Finally, she told her parents. She explained that ever since sneaking into the storage room and looking through the old photo album, strange things had been happening to her. Her parents' expressions darkened. For a moment, they just stared at her. Then her mother said quietly, "Don't worry about it." That was all. No explanation. But something in their reaction told Sarah they knew exactly what she was talking about. She couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with the unknown girl in the photos. A few days later, she couldn't resist and peeked into the unused room again. The album and the porcelain doll were both gone. Even after that, the strange occurrences around Sarah didn't stop. At last, her worried parents finally opened up. Before Sarah was born, they said they had once had another daughter, but she died in a car accident at the age of 6. Sarah had an older sister. The porcelain doll had been a gift from a family friend to celebrate that child's birth. After her death, they couldn't bring themselves to throw it away, so it had remained on display. All the belongings and keepsakes that once belonged to their lost daughter had been stored in that room. They had always intended to tell Sarah the truth someday, but never found the right time. Then her parents admitted something that made Sarah's blood run cold. In recent years, strange things had been happening around the house. The door to that room, though always kept shut, would sometimes be found wide open. And late at night, from deep within the supposedly empty room, came the faint sounds of movement, as if someone small were quietly walking around. That wasn't all. Shoes and sneakers, once neatly lined up at the entryway, would often be found scattered, as if someone had deliberately kicked them around. The incidents with the porcelain doll were even more unsettling. They would find the glass case shattered on the floor, and the doll's position would have shifted, its angle now seeming to stare directly at them. It was as if the doll had a will of its own, moving on its own accord. These events kept happening repeatedly. Her parents, unable to handle it any longer, consulted a pastor from a church they knew and asked him to cleanse the room. According to the pastor, the porcelain doll carried the spirit of Sarah's deceased sister, who was constantly watching the family. Her sister's soul had left lingering regrets in this world and continued to float, trying to communicate her will through the doll. It was explained that the souls of children who die young are especially prone to inhabiting vessels like dolls. In other words, because her parents had hidden her sister's existence, that lonely spirit, driven by solitude, had been using the doll to assert her presence more and more strongly. From then on, Sarah and her parents began sorting through albums and keepsakes, offering prayers and remembering her late sister with genuine sincerity. The pastor advised that it was unwise to keep objects like the doll indefinitely, so they brought it to the church where prayers and a cleansing ritual were performed before it was burned. He also warned that keeping too many of her sister's belongings could be harmful, so they burned her clothes and toys along with the doll. The only items they kept were a few photographs. They framed them and placed 3 on the living room side table as if she were still there, quietly watching over her family. Sarah and her family did everything they could to perform the cleansing rituals. After that, the strange phenomena stopped completely. And finally, Sarah could never forget the sight of her parents standing before the framed photographs of her sister on the living room side table, tearfully saying, "We're sorry for hiding you all this time." Now, on her sister's birthday, the family places flowers, lights candles, and gathers to share memories of her. "I truly believe my sister is still watching over us from heaven," Sarah quietly told me. Story 13. I think my apartment is haunted. I'm coming here seeking some guidance because this whole situation has me genuinely confused. And honestly, I haven't even brought it up to my wife yet since I don't want to sound crazy. This might be a bit of a long post. So first off, thank you to anyone who takes the time to read it. To give a little background, I'm 26 years old, have a stable job, and my longtime girlfriend and I got married a little over a year ago. We have a beautiful daughter who's turning 5 soon. My wife and I still aren't sure where we want to settle down permanently, so we signed a new lease back in June for an apartment. It's a beautiful place. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, nothing huge, but perfect for our small family. The first few weeks there were completely normal. Your typical new home adjustment period. We were settling in, getting used to the layout, figuring out where everything should go. Everything felt fine. Then, around mid-July, I started noticing little things that didn't make sense, but that I brushed off at first. For example, I'd find my keys in places I would never leave them. My wife and daughter both swore they hadn't touched them. Still, I told myself maybe I'd just forgotten. Sometimes the lights would flicker or turn on by themselves, probably an electrical issue. The building's a bit older. Faucets would be left running occasionally, which I blamed on plumbing quirks. Even shoes would end up in different spots around the house, probably just my daughter, since she has a vivid imagination. This went on until around mid-August, when things started getting stranger. I began having these vivid, unsettling dreams, the kind that don't make any sense but still leave you uneasy when you wake up. Then something else started happening. No matter what time I went to bed, I'd wake up every single night at exactly 1:30 a.m. It didn't matter if I'd gone to sleep early or late, it was always 1:30 on the dot. It started to get really frustrating. Not long after that, I began feeling something even more disturbing, the sensation of being touched in my sleep. It wasn't just a faint feeling either, it felt real, like someone physically touching me. I'd wake up startled and ask my wife to stop touching me, but every time she'd respond half asleep, saying she wasn't anywhere near me. And yet, it kept happening. Not every single night, but often enough to really unsettle me. Still, I kept waking up at 1:30 a.m., almost without fail. There's been this constant feeling that I'm being watched, like someone's staring at me even when no one's there. It's hard to describe, but it's unsettling, like a weight in the room you can't shake off. Anyway, last night, or technically this morning, things got even stranger. I got off work around 2 a.m. and made it home closer to 3. My wife has to be up by 6 for her job, so I decided to sleep on the couch instead of disturbing her. I figured I'd catch up on a few Netflix shows since I rarely get time for that, and I must have dozed off around 4 a.m. with the TV still on. I know, bad habit. That's when the weirdest thing yet happened. Once again, I felt something, a clear, firm touch on my shoulder while I was asleep. It startled me awake, my heart racing, and I immediately looked around to see what it was. For context, our apartment's main area is open concept. The living room flows straight into the dining area and kitchen. There aren't any doors separating them, just one big connected space. When I sat up on the couch, my eyes drifted toward the kitchen, and that's when I froze. Every single cabinet was wide open. The breaker box was open, the microwave door, every drawer, the pantry, even the AC housing door. All of it. My first thought was that someone had broken in, so I immediately grabbed my firearm and went room to room. Nothing. Everything else looked completely normal. Before closing everything back up, I decided to take a quick picture, which I'll post in the comments, and the photo came out super distorted. I can't explain it. Now I'm left genuinely confused and a little scared. I plan to start praying more, maybe going to church more often since we've only been going once or twice a month. Can anyone offer me any insight or advice on what to do next? I honestly feel like I'm going crazy, but this is starting to get weirder by the day. Story 14. My stories from a creepy abandoned farm and stables. As the title suggests, these events all took place at a creepy old farm in my hometown. The property was strange. It had a main house, a smaller cottage beside it, a barn, a few small stables, and a brick building behind them that we could only assume was some kind of workshop. What made it even weirder was its location. It sat right on the town's coastline. Back then, this place was a popular hangout spot for me and a few friends during our teenage years. It's been torn down since, but we all had some strange shared encounters there that I'd like to talk about and maybe see if anyone else has experienced something similar. It's worth noting that the property seemed to have a dark history. There was once another building connected to it, some kind of inn, which, from what I've heard, was the site of a murder or some kind of death years ago. As for the rest of the buildings, I wouldn't be surprised if they'd seen tragedy too. They were old, 1800s at the very least. The first encounter happened in the barn. Now I should mention that the coastline nearby was pretty popular, so it wasn't unusual for people to walk past occasionally. But despite all the times we'd been there before, we had never heard anyone loud enough to make out their voice from inside the barn. We were exploring when we suddenly heard a sound coming from the back corner. What's strange is that my ears only picked up a noise, but my brain instantly registered it as a girl's voice. I couldn't tell what was said, but somehow, instinctively, I just knew it was a girl. What made it even weirder was that my friend, who had headphones on, also heard it. We both snapped our heads toward the same exact spot at the same time, but our third friend, who was standing right beside us with no headphones or distractions, didn't hear anything. That's one of the main reasons I don't believe it was someone walking by. Two of us reacted instantly to the same sound, while the one person who should have heard it the clearest didn't notice a thing. The next incident was the creepiest. It's important to note that one of the buildings caught fire just a few hours after we left that day. We'd been exploring and hanging out as usual and decided to go into the main house. The only way in was by climbing a ladder up to a top floor window. Stupid, I know, but we were only about 15 or 16. Once everyone was inside, something felt different. Normally, we'd have no problem going downstairs, but that day, not one of us wanted to. We stood in the doorway, staring at the stairs, and all agreed, something feels off. It was as if the whole atmosphere had shifted, from fun, harmless exploring to this heavy, dreadful sense that something was very wrong. We all noped out of there together and went to the beach instead. The building where we got that awful feeling wasn't even the one that caught fire. I don't believe anyone could have been down there either. We'd already been there for at least 2 hours, and with only one entrance, we would have definitely heard someone come in. What I can't shake is what on earth that feeling was. Why could only my friend and I hear the girl's voice? And something I've started to wonder lately was that strange, overwhelming dread trying to warn us to stay away before the fire happened. The whole place has long since been torn down, but those events have always stayed with me. Story 15. When I was with my ex-girlfriend, I used to stay at her parents' house pretty often. After her parents divorced, her mom moved out, and one day while her dad was cleaning out some of her old stuff, he found a pot cookie. Now, I was no stranger to edibles. I'd had my fair share, but my ex wasn't really into that kind of thing. One night, we were lying in bed watching Toy Story when her dad came in and offered us the cookie. We looked at each other and kind of shrugged like, why not? He handed it over, then left to go hang out with his new girlfriend or something. So we had the house to ourselves. We split the cookie evenly. It was supposed to be only 25 milligrams total, and went back to watching the movie. For a while, everything was fine. Then she started acting off, really off. I turned off the movie to try and comfort her, but she started going through these strange, almost disconnected episodes of behavior, like she wasn't fully there. One minute, she's freaking out, pushing me away, yelling at me not to touch her or even look at her. The next, she's telling me how much she loves me and how glad she is that I'm there. Then out of nowhere, she's laughing hysterically. This went on for hours, well into the early morning. It honestly felt like someone was flipping channels in her brain every few minutes. I started getting genuinely worried. At some point, we ended up on the bathroom floor, where I tried to comfort her until she finally began to tire out. Around 3 or 4 a.m., I managed to get her back into bed. She seemed a bit more herself by then, but she kept asking me to stop shaking the bed. I told her I wasn't, and that the bed wasn't shaking either. This is where things got really spooky. After she finally fell asleep, the end of the bed started to shake violently. I'm talking full-on exorcist-style shaking. Every hair on my body stood up. My ex was out cold, completely unaware, while I just sat there frozen in terror. I started praying silently, asking God to make whatever was happening stop, to make it leave, but it kept going. Then in the middle of it, I began to hear music in my head, music I'd never heard before but somehow seemed to be creating in real time. I'm a musician, so that kind of thing isn't totally unusual for me, but looking back now, I can't help but wonder if something else was giving me that music. Eventually, the shaking stopped. The air felt still again. I finally drifted off to sleep, just as the first light of morning started to creep through the window. We woke up the next morning, and I immediately insisted we go out for breakfast. Once we sat down at the restaurant, I told her, "We've got to talk about last night," but she looked terrified. She didn't want to say a word about it. I kept pressing, telling her that I'd experienced something paranormal. Finally, she broke down and told me what she'd seen. She said there was a shadow figure made of clay attached to my back, and that every time I tried to comfort her or reach toward her, she didn't see me. She saw its tentacles stretching out at her. To this day, I've never forgotten that. I know drugs can sometimes open doors or blur the line between worlds, and I've had other paranormal experiences before, but this one remains the most unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.